The next thing I want to talk about is the Pantone color of the year. So Pantone came out for 2025 with chocolate mousse, and it's like kind of a mid to deep brown color. And what's interesting about this is the role in which these institutions play in the digital age.
What a brand, what a brand, what a brand, what a mighty good brand. Say it again now. What a brand, what a brand, what a brand, what a mighty good brand.
So our friend Oren, he did a video on this, and he so aptly put that the color brown they picked is so 2020 to 2023, because it was the color that was big on the Yeezy. It was Kim Kardashian Beats tones. It was these like deep neutrals Skims took on. You saw it kind of everywhere a few years ago. And so many of these influencers and the digital kind of landscape, they're so deeply entwined. Oh, so annoying. They're so deeply entwined. What?
That we should have a clip that's like 5 minutes later and I'm asleep talking about brown.
Well, I'm going somewhere with this.
No, I know. But from like, as even Sophia's thing said today, the podcasts have to be fucking entertaining, not perfect presentation, right? So we should be able to have like things that are
Okay, but maybe the
raw,
podcast
fun.
is over. Maybe this is a clip I'm doing for TikTok.
Cool. No, I got it. I'm saying, but me kind of pretending to fall asleep during the talk, that's kind of funny. Like the people want to follow us because they like our dynamic of how we work. Like that. That's where I think this is going to go. Because this content is so much better than Discover Egg shit. You know what I mean? Like it's so good what we're doing here.
Yeah, okay. So I wanted to talk about Pantone color of the year. Mm-hmm. And they came out this year with chocolate mousse. And what's really interesting is to have a conversation of where these traditional institutions lie in the digital age. Because our friend Oren aptly put, the color that they selected is a color that you saw quite largely in like 2013 to like 2023. And it's dated. And it's interesting that brands like Pantone that used to predict color waves and color trends are no longer in touch with what we're seeing digitally and the rate in which we're moving digitally.
So where do you get the answer of what's the cool brown?
It's not even about brown this year. Like it.
Who decides?
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, on one hand, when you go into like Shenzhen and like Guangzhou, like you go to like the center points of where all of the brands are pre-ordering next year's fabrics. You're seeing a lot of deep greens, you're seeing a lot of deep blues, you're also seeing a lot of like bright colors with like bright vintage packaging kind of having a big emergence.
No, I got that. I'm just wondering like who's behind the decision to order the colors in those pre-production phases that sets the tone for the next year, you know what I mean?
Well, it's probably hand in hand the Chinese factories, because like they're also placing orders and they're also kind of working with brands, because brands also don't work necessarily on like a full calendar year, right? Like they're kind of always in production and always ordering, but we can predict trends based on the orders that they've made 6 to 8 months prior to.
It just seems like it could be kind of a funny scene in a movie if you were to track down the actual human who's like somewhere in a corporate office who goes, next year's lime green. Do you know what I mean? Or the circumstances that lead to saying we need to order for next year's batch of clothing.
Yeah, but you bring up an interesting point. It's like there's different trends for like graphic design and fonts. There's different trends for like athleisure. There's different trends for like homeware and home goods. Like because we now live in a digital world, there's so many niche offshoots or different style types where you can see like emerging colors. And that's where I'm kind of going with this is like, what is the role that Pantone used to play? What role do they have today in the digital age? Like, does their announcement of the color, like, is it even relevant anymore? You know, based on them needing to plan things out when they're completely out of touch with what you're able to find and see on TikTok and Instagram.
To me, the tempo of style change must be a lot faster, because in the past you had fashion shows, right, which were kind of analog. You would go, you would see, there'd be photographers everywhere, you would see next year's. But in today's world, like you can see somebody who's incredibly stylish across the ocean, right, or in Africa. Like you can pick up kind of trends, and then who makes them get to that tipping point? Like, is it an influencer? It's the person who's traveling and seeing things and synergizing it. Like there's a whole different metric for making a trend, I think, than it was years ago.
100%. And that's what I thought was really interesting about the Pantone color of the year and like just generally the role that it plays, because really I would say the last 2 years there's been such a fixation on digital creators doing massive digital research, and especially like decision makers that are within like 50 to 100 companies, to be able to say like, this is what we're predicting, like this is what we're kind of seeing across the board. And it's not in line with how these old school bureaucratic mentalities used to say like, we're the decision makers, because they're not anymore. Like, and that is what's really fascinating about this kind of this move of tradition versus digital, is like, do we maintain it or is it discredited?
I'm trying to think of an analogy of like another kind of archaic institution that's long gone, like Kodak saying this is the X of the year.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? But it's been around for a long time. And what Pantone should do is open itself up into the digital world and be able to like mass analyze, hundreds of millions of posts and trends. And if it's going to come out with that, as opposed to a bunch of experts sitting in their head office saying, this is what we decide is the color of the year. And we're going to ignore the influencers, just like some people ignored the podcasters in the election, right? Like people are ignoring the real data sets that matter, but still trying to cling to their authority.
Well, what's funny is like, even when like Webster Dictionary is kind of the same way, like when they adopt like the word of the year, it's usually a word that's like been kind of mass used for many years, because they want to make sure they're putting a word into the dictionary that's like not just like a fleeting like kind of slang, right? And like it took them like 10 years to put like selfie, as the word into the dictionary, because like it actually like became the official word for it. But what's interesting is that when you think about even what Pantone should do, is it them hiring people to scan the internet, or is it them almost creating a panel of like the modern decision makers and having them all come together and be like, these are our, like almost more like the Oscars, like they're kind of voting on what they think the potential colors are of the
Academy. Like, why aren't the Oscars voted on by people? Like, remember the Oscars are voted on by the Academy.
I would still call them the Academy. I just think who the Academy is today is not the same standard of what the Oscars delegates as the Academy. Like, if I was to select in the Academy today of Pantone, it'd be a lot of digital creators or people that work within influential brands that are creating a lot of the trends.
So decision makers, we could get into the Oscars, but the Academy Awards are no longer reflecting quality of filmmaking now. It's like being totally corrupted into a kind of an elite decision tree of self-aggrandizing reflection. Like they're not providing the service they were, and I don't think Pantone is, by way of comparison.
No, I think it'd be interesting if they took more of that kind of an approach, but the way that it makes sense for it to be, I mean, all things get ruined. Like over time, and that's why you need to like have things come in and shake it up. And I think Pantone is a perfect example of that. Like, there's still such a social moment for Pantone to come out digitally.
I don't think most people know I didn't know what Pantone was. Like, I didn't even know what I didn't even know what that was, really.
So Pantone is the basically like the Pantone color is the official color code for creating that color, and then they like name the colors. So every year Pantone calls one of the colors a color of the year. But like, if I was to say like, if we were to design that shirt, I would give you a Pantone color for that blue. So like it's the official kind of like color code for coloring, and Pantone is the official brand. So they've gotten into like nail polish, and like they've kind of ended up, Kodak isn't actually that bad of like a way to explain it, because like the brand is quite old and like has like that legacy kind of feel, but they haven't really modernized. And like that's why it's an interesting conversation, is because we're at this point where technology has developed with social media so quickly, and a brand like Pantone hasn't adapted, where today this is like the first year where it's like really like you're out of touch. Like this color was big years ago. It can't make sense to bring back in the cycle of fashion for how close it was big. You get what I'm saying? Like it was so big a few years ago.
Well, it's even redefining things. Like, do people really care about the color of the year anymore, or do they care about the color of the month? Or do they care more about, there's no universal color of the year? Are there many more regional places where there are colors? Like, I think the world has kind of been democratized in that we can create tribes across different places. So like one central authority dictating or pronouncing is less appealing to people who are moving faster and connecting.
Well, that's a great point. Like that kind of then poses the question of like, did Pantone exist during a more simple world, you know, or a more simple time where an office in New York could say this is the Pantone color of the year, and a business in Germany or London, if they got access to that, could use that as a like, this is what's happening in New York, you know, like it was a figment of a time where you needed that extra element of marketing to sell a product, like from a scarcity standpoint, because it was like only going to be big for that year. And that's, I guess, kind of the question is like, does that now no longer work in a digital age? Or does Pantone need to adapt to having a color of the year symbolically, because like we do care about, you know, years to date, and then in addition to that they do quarterly or seasonal colors? Like do they add more?
I actually think there's a movement towards more retro, right? Like this is a Pantone of 1954. You know what I mean? Like that would be more of an interesting design thing, because I think in a cluttered world we're aching for the simplicity, but we don't want the simplicity today. In today's colored world, we want to embrace the simplicity of the past.
Well, that's actually, I think, cooler from a brand execution. Like for a brand to be like, we're like for every month we're doing the color of the year from the fifth, like, you know what I mean? Like decades, like that'd be super cool. But I still do think that the Pantone color of the year is interesting because like 50 years from now, 100 years from now, like to be able to continue doing that, there's a legacy to it. It should still exist. It's just there should be something in addition to, or a better approach to selecting that color when the world has changed and the rate at which
I hear you.
the change has changed.
All right.
It's the change.
We'll be the
drinking
change that we want to be, or something.
The change you want. Be the change you wish to see in the world.